I suppose the first slide is on show, which just has the title of the presentation, and we can go immediately to the next slide, which starts showing what I'm going to be talking about. When I was invited to speak at this meeting, Howard Duncan asked me an interesting question to talk about migration and population growth. And most of the time, we in the population division, though we work very much in producing estimates and projections of population that include international migration, we don't have the time to look in depth about what the contribution of migration has been to population change. And this is my opportunity to show you what our numbers show regarding the interrelationship between these aspects of population change. The first slide of my presentation shows you how a population changes. It has a simple equation that population change is equal to the births minus the deaths plus the net migration that happens in a population. And net migration, as I hope some of you know, is the difference between the number of immigrants and the number of emigrants. The other part of the population change, the births minus the deaths, is something that we demographers call natural increase. So during my talk, I will be talking on the one side about net migration and on the other side about natural increase. And to make things comparable, because populations have very different sizes, we divide the net migration and the natural increase by the population in order to get what we call population rates. So we're talking about the rate of natural increase and the rate of net migration. Now, as again you will see during my talk, I have to think of two different kinds of countries in order to make the situation somewhat clear to you. There are countries where the number of immigrants exceed the number of emigrants, and those I will call the countries of immigration. They are not the traditional countries of immigration like Canada or the United States. They are countries where over a given period the immigrants happen to exceed the emigrants, and therefore they have positive net migration. In the same vein, countries where the emigrants exceed the immigrants over a given period are countries of net emigration. And it's very important to distinguish between the two, because even the types of measurements that we can make in relating net emigration or net immigration to population change have to be different. Now, the next slide is a map that shows the rate of population change in 2000-2005. I chose 2000-2005 because that's the period for which we have the most recent data in the estimates and projections I'm showing to you. The period 2005-2010 was based mostly on projections already. So you see in that map where the red means very high population growth, the pink moderately high, and the dark green very low, in fact negative population growth, that there's at this moment a great variety of levels of population growth in the countries of the world. To be noticed is that a lot of Europe, particularly Eastern Europe, is currently experiencing negative population growth. That means the population is declining, including with whatever migration exists there. The next slide tells you that I'm going to be looking at the effect of international migration on population change over two periods of time. And I've decided to look at two very long periods to give time for migration to sort of stabilize, because in certain countries there are moments in which there's a lot of immigration or a lot of emigration, as you will hear later in the talks of my colleagues that are going to talk about refugee flows or people who get displaced, but they are not maintained over a long period of time. So by looking at longer periods, I'm smoothing out the effect of migration, and the story I will tell you will be a little bit more significant. So the periods I'm looking at is 1970-1990 and 1990-2010. So 20-year periods that will be compared. In the next slide, I'm presenting to you in a very schematic way the rates of natural increase that all the countries in the world for which we calculate the natural increase had between 1970 and 1990. And the point there is to show you that during that period, there was already a great variety of levels of natural increase. Specifically, you ought to note, and you probably know, that the developed countries of the world were growing very slowly already. That's the red part of the graph, the bars are red that are to the rightmost part of the graph. All the rest of the world that are the developing countries in Africa, Asia, Oceania, and Latin America and the Caribbean were having much higher rates of natural increase, but even within those regions, especially within Asia and within Latin America, there was already quite a differentiation between different countries. Because during the period 1970-1990 is when many countries start experiencing a very rapid decline of fertility. The slide that comes next is a similar one. You have the same regions of the world, but now if you manage to notice when the slides changed, many of these vertical bars have become smaller, particularly in Asia and in Latin America. And that circle that you see to the right that I hope you're seeing is circling the case of the developed countries, where, as you noticed before in the map, what we're seeing is that many countries in the developed world are now experiencing negative rates of natural increase. That means the deaths are exceeding the births, and that means they're in a strange place demographically. And what we expect is that more countries in the future are going to have that type of experience. But that makes it a challenge to assess what the contribution of migration is, because when we divide by negative numbers, we get negative contributions, even if migration is making a positive contribution. So I want you to bear this in mind. Now, to give you an idea of how much, because fertility has continued to decline, decline started in the 70s, but it has continued to decline up to today. And the natural increase, therefore, has changed on average to become lower at the world level, and certainly for developing countries. And between 1970 and 1990, about half of the world countries were having rates of natural increase of at least 2.4% per year. But by 1990, 2010, only a quarter of the countries of the world had such high rates of natural increase of above 2.4% per year. So there's been a big decline in natural increase, and that will have some impact on how you will have to interpret what I will show later, which is the contribution of either net emigration or net immigration to natural increase, because the denominator of whatever I'm comparing is becoming smaller for most countries. The next slide shows you how I'm going to assess the effect of net emigration on population change. So I'm going to look only at the countries that have an excess of emigrants over immigrants. Those are the countries of net emigration, and that means their net migration is negative. So in that case, population change is equal to natural increase minus net emigration, because the emigration is negative. I'm going to consider the emigration in the graphs that I show you as positive, but it's having a negative effect. It's reducing population growth. And in order to assess by how much is reducing population growth, I'm going to divide net emigration, considered as positive, divided by the natural increase, the rate of natural increase. So that means the graphs that I'm going to show next tell you by how much, what is the percentage reduction of natural increase caused by net emigration. So the next graph shows you how net emigration reduces natural increase in terms of percentages between 1970 and 1990 in the different regions of the world. So the first thing to notice is that for most countries, there is a reduction produced. Most of the countries of net emigration, I'm already selecting those countries. Net emigration reduces natural increase by relatively low proportions. In 1970, 1990, half of the countries of net emigration had a net emigration that reduced natural increase by at most 10%. However, there were a quarter of all countries of net emigration where emigration reduced natural increase by 27% or more. And as you see, in Oceania, for example, there's a pink bar going very high. It goes above 100% because we have a small country, Tonga, where emigration surpassed natural increase. That means the population was declining because of emigration, not because the natural increase was negative. You also have relatively high levels of reduction of the natural increase in countries like Afghanistan in Asia. That's the peak that you see in Asia. In Guyana, in Grenada, and Suriname in Latin America. In Samoa, which would be the second largest bar in Oceania. And also in Hungary, among the developed countries. In all of these countries, the reduction of natural increase due to net emigration is above 78% and usually much higher than 80%. That means a very substantive reduction of natural increase because of large emigration on average over a 20-year period. And very importantly, most of these countries that I mentioned, the outliers that are not many, had very high rates of natural increase, above 2.5% per year, in every case except Hungary. And as I say, I mentioned Afghanistan. You saw the cause of emigration there, as you all know, was the conflict in the country and the huge numbers of refugees that left the country. It is not the typical type of emigration that one thinks about when one thinks about international migration caused by economic and other reasons. If we go to the next slide, which is now showing the contribution of net emigration to reduce natural increase between 1990 and 2010, what you will see is that that slide is missing one important part of the world. The developed countries are not shown. And the reason I'm not showing the developed countries is that because most of them have very low natural increase in 1990, 2010, or even negative natural increase, it makes no sense to take that ratio that I showed you before because it's a negative ratio and it's negative because the denominator is negative. So they're out of this graph. I will show them to you later. So this graph is only showing the developing world. And again, the interesting points is that you see that in this graph, the number of countries that are having a lot higher reduction of natural increase in relative terms or rather the net emigration is responsible now for a slightly higher reduction of natural increase on average. At least in half of the countries, the net emigration is reducing natural increase by 12% or more, and there are a quarter of the countries where natural increase is being reduced by at least 20%. In Latin America, that is a very special case already in the 1970, 1990, and you could see that Latin America had much higher bars. In Latin America, at least half the countries have seen their natural increase reduced by at least 20% because of net emigration. And in Oceania, that doesn't have too many entries here. 4 of the 6 countries presented also have very high reductions of natural increase because of emigration. The outliers that you see in this graph in Asia, the big outlier is Kazakhstan, where again the percentage of natural increase that is being reduced by emigration is above 100%, is above 120%. That means that they're experiencing population decline because of net emigration. And the same thing happens to Barbados in Latin America. Other high values are Guyana and St. Vincent and the Grenadines in Latin America, and that's about it, that also have more than 80% reduction of natural increase because of emigration. Most of these countries, as you know, are either very special cases, as the case of Afghanistan, of Kazakhstan, time where a lot of the immigration was due to the change of status of these countries and the big immigration of people of German origin.